subscriber. There are two things about the UFO controversy that make it uniquely interesting. The first is that it is probably the deepest mystery that mankind has ever encountered. The second is that it has been the object of so much denial despite the fact that it is certainly a real phenomenon. At the very least, it is a social issue of the utmost importance because it has all the potential of a truly powerful idea to enter unconscious mythology and there to generate beliefs so broad in their scope and deep in their impact that they emerge with religious implications for the surrounding culture. The only thing now needed to make the UFO myth a new religion of remarkable scope and force is a single undeniable sighting. Such a sighting need last only a few minutes, just long enough to be thoroughly documented. It will at once invest the extraterrestrials' channels, the space brothers, believers, and the UFO cultists with the appearance of revealed truth. This unfortunate state of affairs has come about for one reason, and one reason only. Our best intellects have methodically ignored the issue of UFOs for half a century, and have thus left the public without recourse in making sense of the incredibly subtle and complex experience of sighting them and interacting with their inhabitants. There are two reasons that the scientific community has been unable to address the issue sensibly. The first is that the phenomenon is so elusive that it cannot be easily measured. The UFO occupants, if there are any, cannot be studied or even engaged in dialogue, and their machines are only rarely seen by trained observers who are also willing to make their observations known to their colleagues. The second is simply fear. Any explanation of the phenomenon that is now prosaic must inevitably lead to a profound challenge to cherished theories about the nature of mind and universe and man's place in the cosmos. If we come to a correct understanding of the UFO phenomenon, we may well in the process destroy the whole basis of our present beliefs about reality. Sensing this on an almost instinctive level, scientists hide behind the facile posturing of self-styled debunkers who can be counted on to distort or suppress unsettling data in order to leave our current ideas intact. The public is left, as I was left, facing the visitors in the middle of the night without any notion of what they are, where they came from, or how to act in their presence. Absent any genuine understanding of the phenomenon, one is forced to accept that it is what it appears to be. As Dr. Valley points out in his masterful and groundbreaking analysis, that is exactly what we should not be doing. He places this modern UFO experience firmly in its historical context as the latest manifestation of a phenomenon that goes back at least as far as recorded history. Thus, at a stroke, he redefines it as a part of the fundamental mythology of human experience and enables us, for the first time, to begin to raise questions about it of sufficient depth and resonance to be meaningful. In the process, he takes us on a grand journey through the annals of strange and anomalous human experience. He reveals an appalling truth: the phenomenon has been with us throughout history, and never, in all of that time, have we been able to deal sensibly with it. Whatever it is, it changes with our ability to perceive it. The 15th century saw the visitors as fairies. The 10th century saw them as sylphs. The Romans saw them as wood nymphs and sprites. And so it goes back into time. One of the thousands of people who wrote me concerning my book Communion had this fascinating insight: whatever cosmology or mythology I was immersed in seemed to be the factor for shaping the context and attendant imagery of my experiences, which I believe are essentially of an abstract nature. And yet I myself have faced physical beings. The context of my own experience, with extensive witness by others, makes it clear that the phenomenon can emerge as an entirely real, physical presence that is quite capable of manipulating its environment. The next moment, though, it can evaporate into thin air, leaving not a trace of what was a moment before an immense and overwhelmingly real presence. How could this be? It is no wonder that we have never been able to ask satisfactory questions about the phenomenon. I have even thought that it may simply be what the force of evolution looks like when it acts upon conscious creatures. After all, our entire 5,000-year history is but a moment in the life of our species, less than an instant in the evolution of the universe. It may be that our history is in its entirety one of those magnificent explosions of evolutionary force that suddenly change everything, effectively equivalent to the moment when Cro-Magnon man burst on the scene, or the much longer moment when the dinosaurs disappeared. And the visitors, a dark and highly active phenomenon that seems to inhabit cracks in the unconscious, cracks in space-time, and cracks in history, are somewhere close to the essence of what is happening. Drive. Valley elucidates the basis of what must surely become a new vision of the UFO phenomenon, one that will sweep aside the various levels of illusion behind which it hides. Drive. Valley argues that the force that now appears in the form of UFOs and attendant manifestations has emerged into history many times, operating as a sort of control mechanism that has altered and shaped human affairs, often profoundly. He demonstrates, for example, that the miracle of Fatima was a sort of hybrid, appearing in part as a religious phenomenon and in part as a classic UFO encounter. One is left to wonder if there might not have been a very real technology behind the miracles and apparitions that have done so much to influence the growth of our cultures. Indeed, viewed from this perspective, it can be vigorously argued that most major religions have emerged out of visionary experiences that are, in fact, understandable in the setting of a UFO encounter. Thus, the phenomenon becomes not simply one of a group of things that influence the evolution of culture, but rather a primary engine. It could very well be the single most important influence on our history. And it is arguably more active now on a global scale than it has ever been before. This should tell us something about the importance of this moment in history, and should suggest to us that the time to come to a clear and correct understanding of the phenomenon is now. The longer we remain ignorant of it, the more we guarantee that it will retain its power over us. It is time to appraise this phenomenon with all of the clarity of mind that it deserves. Drive. Valley, it seems to me, has taken a dramatically important step in this direction. Introduction: closed minds, open questions. A mystery that has lingered in human imagination for many years, the mystery of unidentified flying objects and their occupants, is coming back to the front pages of our newspapers with a parade of new claims. Not only are these objects seen in the sky and on the ground, but they are said to have contacted humans and, in some cases, abducted them. The public has reacted to these stories with a mixture of skepticism, awe, and fear. The lack of reliable data and the absence of serious research are intensifying this concern. Therefore, the time has come to re-examine the UFO phenomenon and to reopen the archives that deal with that ancient dream of our civilization, of every civilization, contact with alien beings. Each culture has sought to assemble this puzzle in its own way, and each culture has contributed something to the great pool of legends, folklore, and traditions that link human imagination with the heavens. Today, the rapid pace of technology precipitates a new awareness of the importance of the problem. The modern reader needs a new perspective, a new paradigm in which fear can be set aside and knowledge can prevail. Above all, he needs more facts. In an effort to help answer this need, the present book represents the distillation of some 25 years of research. It gathers and updates some previously published material into a new, more manageable collection of the most significant events that have marked the rich history of the UFO phenomenon. And it leads to a new conclusion, although I am among those who believe that UFOs are real physical objects. I do not think they are extraterrestrial in the ordinary sense of the term. In my view, they present an exciting challenge to our concept of reality itself. It is sad that, as the 20th century draws to an end and as new discoveries become possible, the minds of many scientists investigations. I have spoken to numerous witnesses, people I could hear and touch and look straight in, beings who seem endowed with supernatural powers. This idea can shake our society to the very roots of stand. This chapter summarizes some of these traditions and draws a close parallel between the thing was big. 4 white lights, funnel-shaped, extended from understanding of the problem, if these objects have been seen from time immemorial, as I will show, and if their occultism, awe, and fear. The lack of reliable data, imagination with the heavens. Today, the rapid pace of technology precipitates a new awareness of the importance of the problem. The modern reader needs a new perspective, a new paradigm in which fear can be set aside and knowledge can prevail. Drive Valley, it seems to me, has taken a dramatically important step in this direction. Is with a mixture of skepticism, awe, and fear. Folklore and traditions that link human imagination. It is sad that, as the 20th century draws to an end and as new discoveries become possible, the minds of many scientists remain closed to this problem. New York Times bestseller list. Communion and intruders contain sensational acts with similar lines of behavior, then it is not reasonable to assume that they are simply extraterrestrial visitors. They must be something more. Perhaps they have always been here. On Earth. With us. In my view, the widespread belief among researchers of the field in the literal truth of the abductions is only a very crude approximation of a much more complex tapestry. Components. I would be very happy, for instance, to simply understand how these objects manipulate electromagnetic waves to create a large amount of energy is stored. This energy is manifested by pulsed light phenomena. These questions are very much open. They provide one of the most exciting challenges ever presented to science, to our collective imagination, to human reason. I do not have the answer to the mystery, but I do have a great deal of relevant data. Much progress has been made in the last several years, and in my own work I have come to think of the UFO problem in terms of 3 distinct levels. The first level is physical. We now know that the UFO behaves like a region of space, of small dimensions, about 10 meters, within which a very large amount of energy is stored. This energy is manifested by pulsed light phenomena of intense colors and by other forms of electromagnetic radiation. The second level is biological. Reports of UFOs show all kinds of psychophysiological effects on the witnesses. Exposure to the phenomenon causes visions, hallucinations. These are the 40s and 50s. The experience of a close encounter with a UFO is a shattering physical and mental ordeal. It's obviously challenged by the claim of a direct communication in modern times with visible beings who seem endowed with supernatural powers. This idea can shake our society to the very roots of its culture. Witnesses are no longer afraid to come forward with personal stories of abductions, of spiritual exchanges with aliens, even of sexual interaction with them. Such reports are folklore in the making. I have discovered that they form a striking parallel to the tales of meetings with elves and jinn of medieval times, with the denizens with strange aerial objects and their alleged pilots. Interrupted her to slow down her excited recollection of that episode. I wanted to get the step-by-step account of her perception of alien beings. Each culture has sought to assemble this puzzle in its own way, and new types of beliefs are promoted. A active phenomenon that seems to inhabit cracks in the unconscious, cracks in space-time, and cracks in history are somewhere close to the essence of what by an object that came as a whirlwind. He saw wheels within his questions about it of sufficient depth and resonance to be made to assemble this puzzle in its own way, and each culture has contributed something to the great pool of legends, folklore, and traditions that link human imagination. At the very least, it is a social issue of the utmost importance, with one of history's major transitions. Part 1, The Alien Chronicles. In the last analysis, magic, religion and science are nothing but theories of thought, and as science has supplanted its predecessors, so it may hereafter be itself superseded by some more perfect hypothesis, perhaps by some totally different way of looking at the phenomena. The visitors are... Even if we never understand the whole phenomenon, there's still been a model or an executive secretary. Carefully kept my distance from the very vocal groups of research active phenomenon that, in its June 1987 issue, spreading rapidly at all levels of society, incredibly subtle and complex the only thing now needed to make the UFO myth a new religion of reasons that the scientific of UFOs for half a century, and have thus left the public without recourse in making sense in a few minutes, just long enough to be thoroughly documented. It will at once invest the extraterrestrials channels, the Space Brothers, Believers, and the UFO cultists with the appearance of revealed truth. This unfortunate state of affairs has come about for one reason, and one reason only. Our best intellects have methodically ignored the issue of UFOs for half a century. All is biological. Reports of UFOs show all kinds
After she called to tell me about a particular motor she wanted to build. Tall and fashionably dressed, she could have been a model or an executive secretary behind a big desk. Instead, she told me she was bent on solving the energy crisis by building a new type of engine. During our interview, Helen confessed that the motor idea was triggered by an abduction aboard her. The public has reacted to these stories with a mixture of skepticism, awe, and fear. The lack of reliable data and the absence of serious research are intensifying this concern. Therefore, the time has come to re-examine the UFO phenomenon and to reopen the archives that deal with that ancient dream of our civilization, of every civilization, contact with alien beings. Each culture has sought to assemble this puzzle in its own way, and each culture has contributed something to the great pool of legends, folklore, and traditions that link human imagination with the heavens.